Hey guys, it's Coach Don Stanley with Performance Center Boca Raton, Florida, and I know what you're thinking. Something's a little off here, right? Where's the beard? Well, in case you haven't figured out, I am not Dr. Spencer, but today I have the unique privilege to host the live Barefoot Balance. And let's start off with our clip of the day. Oh, that's a great one. That's a great place to start. Monkey see, monkey do. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the ankle, and this is a topic that I could literally probably talk for 7 hours on. Um, the ankle in particular was my, I guess, gateway, if you want to call it, into the world of biomechanics. And so, what's really interesting about the ankle? For me, I had a period of a couple of years where I was working with NFL and NFL Combine, and a big part of the Combine is high-end sprint mechanics. And so one of the things I started to see like fairly frequently was some really tight, stiff ankles on a lot of the athletes. And the more that I looked at that and studied that, I started to understand how important the ankle is when we discuss this concept of regional interdependence, or like how does one area affect another area of the body. And so I really started to understand that the ankle is the connector between your foot and the rest of your body. And so the foot is the interface into the ground. And so initially, the point of contact with your foot with the ground, how your foot reacts to the ground has everything to do with what happens upstream and above. So the more that I looked at, the ankle, the more I started to make the connections between, the foot, certainly, but also the knee, the low back, the hip, and even the upper back. And so just a little technical jargon, what we call dorsiflexion. So if this is your foot, the ability for you to flex your ankle and pull your toes towards your shin is what we call dorsiflexion. And that particular movement has everything to do with your ability to express force into the ground. So if you have limited mobility in your ankle, meaning you can't flex your foot towards your shin, it really creates a host of problems. And so, the body is an excellent compensator. So if you ask your body to do something, it's going to find a way to do it. Unfortunately, there's a cost of doing business for these things that you do. So the more that you compensate for a movement, the more that you're going to, experience a host of other problems. So case in point, if you lose that ability to flex your ankle, then it makes walking very difficult. And so then what starts to happen is if you can't flex your ankle to walk, then you start to rotate your foot out to get around the fact that you can't flex your ankle. So when you rotate your foot externally out, that's when you experience the fallen arch. And then that goes all the way up into the knee. Then you start to experience a buckling inward of the knee, what we call, valgus collapse. And so that whole kinematic, or that whole chain is compromised. And so, in the lives, we've talked a lot about the importance of the foot and the big toe. But the ankle is a critical piece in terms of if the ankle's not operating properly, then you can't transfer power from your foot up into your leg, and you certainly can't transform power from your leg down into your foot. Okay, so we're just take a minute here, and I want to break away to a couple of videos where we're watching Dr. Spencer, perform some movements. And as you're doing them, as we're watching him, do these balance exercises, I want you to really kind of pay attention to the ankle and understand that if the ankle is not functioning properly, it's going to make it very difficult to have good balance. So let's go ahead and take a look at those clips. So in those two clips, it's kind of interesting. In one of the clips, he's using an external, force, a band. And what is that band doing? It's pulling his hip sideways. And so his nervous system and his brain are then going to react to that by counterbalancing his body the other direction. So it really creates an additional challenge of the body to be able to balance with that resistance. And I can tell you in this case, particularly in balance, what we see over and over again is a stiff ankle, one that does not, have really good joint movement, what we call joint mobility. An ankle that doesn't move well is not able to collect information, because the way that our brain works is the way that our body collects information is through movement. Okay. So if you have limited movement in a joint, then you're going to have limited information getting to the brain. And if you have limited information getting to the brain, then your brain is just not going to be able to make those little millisecond adjustments to your body's position in space, gravity, external load. And so you see like really a diminishment in balance. So just for the balance, aspect alone, the ankle is an absolutely critical component. So just want to touch on something for a second. When we think of aging in particular, okay, I think it's kind of a common understanding is that as you age, you get stiff, okay? And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but that's something that people experience as they age, as they just feel stiffness in their body. And so most people equate stiffness to tightness, tightness to shortness, and shortness needs to be stretched, okay? And so you commonly hear people say, man, I'm just stiff all the time, I need to stretch. Well, understand this is that stretching is like 1970s technology. That's not actually how your body works. It's not like physically like, a rubber band that's shortened and it's become stiff and now we need to mechanically stretch it out. That's actually not what happens. What happens is our nervous system controls tension in our tissues. And so 9 times out of 10, if you have a tight muscle or tight tissues around a joint, it's because the joint is not functioning properly. And now your brain is telling the tissues around that joint to shorten, to try and stabilize that joint to protect it. Okay. So specifically, when you look at the ankle is one of those key areas as we age where we lose movement or mobility in that joint. And when that happens, it creates a whole cascade of issues, both above and below the joint. So we already talked about when you lose that movement in the ankle, now you have to, for you to be able to, if you can't like flex your ankle when you walk, right? So then you rotate your foot out to get around the fact that you can't flex that ankle, and your arch collapses and it creates all kinds of problems. But those same things directly when we look at the knee and the hip and above. So the way that I really started to first understand biomechanics was looking at the ankle and seeing how that limited flexion in the ankle was attributing to a large percentage of ACL injuries, interestingly enough. And I happened to, just by chance, I didn't have any background in the sport, but I had a patient who was a professional carpenter and his daughter was a high level club volleyball player. And so through my client, I started working and training with this volleyball player, and this led me to being the head strength coach for a very high level, high school level club volleyball team for a couple of years. And this was something that was very interesting because you see this in particularly volleyball, and you see it a lot in football, where you see a high number of ankle sprains. People are spraining their ankles all the time. And in volleyball, particularly if you play along the net, you're jumping up and down all the time. What happens quite a bit is you jump up and down, and the other person jumps up and down, and people come down and they step on your feet and your ankles. So players are spraining their ankles all the time because they're getting stepped on, which technically that's considered a contact injury. Okay, so the coaches came up with this bright idea and said, well, if our athletes are spraining their ankles all the time, then here's what we're going to do. We're just going to, for the volleyball players, they just put them in a stiff brace. So now they just can't flex their ankle at all. And the football players, the athletic trainers, just tape up their foot. So now basically they don't have an ankle. And you look at it even like a sport like skiing, where they put you in a stiff boot, and that boot essentially eliminates your ankle. You have no more ankle joint. But here's something that's very interesting that happens is when you immobilize that ankle joint, sure enough, you don't sprain your ankle. But you know what you do? Now you've greatly increased the likelihood that you're going to have an ACL injury. So if you're an athlete and you've ever experienced a badly sprained ankle, that can take a while to heal, a month, maybe a couple of months, depending. But an ACL injury is at least, 7, 8 months, sometimes even a year to come back. It's much more serious injury. So again, the intentions of the trainers are good, but this people that just don't really understand the nature of biomechanics and how important the ankle is to what happens both above and below stream. So if you basically tape the ankle into place so the ankle can't do its job, which is flex and respond to movement, then you just overload the knee and blow out the knee. So I would use that as an example, being a sports therapist, that for me, working in vertical sports and explosive sports where ACL injuries are just rampant, and in fact, your teenage daughter is more likely to blow her ACL, by the numbers, than a running back in the NFL. So it's just an epidemic of knee injuries. And so for me, I started to really understand how, a stiff ankle was leading to all of these knee injuries. And we won't even get into hips and other things because they're all working together. So if you just look at that information, you really start to understand the importance of having a healthy ankle that works, functionally. And the good news is, this is something that we work on in, the balance programs, is there's a lot of very simple exercises that you can do to really improve the function of your ankle, and not only improve performance, and whether you're an athlete or whether you're just, a individual that wants to be active and enjoy weekend sports and, do all of these kind of things. Also, a lot of very high percentage of ACL injuries in that community, that there's some very simple things that you can do to really improve ankle function and really open up a whole world of activities. And, at the end of the day, when you're playing sports, particularly recreationally, that's when fitness is really fun, is when you're actually in shape, not injured, all of your joints are working, very well. So again, this is just kind of a little short dive into, starting to understand the importance of the ankle. And I think if people really knew, number one, how important balance is, but also certainly how important the foot and ankle is, they would invest a lot more of their time in those areas, because the payoff is, absolutely huge. I'll also say this too is, science and research has proven unequivocally the value and importance of weight training for fitness and longevity, meaning one of the best things that you can do as you age is to lift weights, strength training. But I will also say this, and I've really kind of made some changes recently where I started to realize using various apps to track, calorie intake, so on and so forth, that being active, walking and moving are just as important, if not more important, than the 3 to 6 hours a week that you spend in the gym. And if you're a person or individual that, you know, is relatively, like, if you work an office job, there's not a lot of movement going on when you're in the office. And so part of your strategy to get fit is, well, maybe you go to the gym after work or before work 3 to 5 days a week. So you're certainly getting in that resistance training part. But if you're somebody that's stiff, and now you go to the gym and you lift weights, that's going to make you more stiff. And so the other piece to the strength training is movement. And if you're somebody that doesn't move a whole lot, then your balance is going to be very poor and your mobility is going to be very poor. And that's when you start to get into really understanding how something like, investing time in the, working on your ankles and your feet, working on balance training is going to make movement overall better, which is going to facilitate you moving more and moving in ways that are, enjoyable to you. It's great to get in steps, but it's also super cool to be able to go out on the weekend and go surfing or go bowling or, any number of expressions of activities that, really kind of create a lifestyle where you're enjoying health, longevity, movement, and fitness. So that's a little, segue into the ankle. I'm sure that next week, Dr. Spencer will have more for you on the ankle. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. And thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon. Peace.